Montana Territory, August 1873. The sky stretched wide and ruthless over the Bitterroot Range, and Franklin Hale had just buried a man when he saw her. She stood in the timberline, barefoot, hair tangled, dress torn down one shoulder. A girl, maybe 20, pale as snowfall and holding herself like a branch about to snap. She did not move, did not speak, just watched him with wide, hollow eyes. Franklin lowered his rifle slowly. "You lost, miss?" No answer, not a blink. He stepped forward, cautious. His boots crunched pine needles. "I won't hurt you. You look like you've been out here a while." Still nothing. He glanced back at the body some drifter who had drawn on him over a poker debt in town. The man had bled out fast. Franklin hadn't planned on company, much less a silent girl watching from the trees. "Name's Franklin Hale. I've got a ranch east of here. You hungry?" Her eyes flicked to the sack of jerky tied to his saddle, then back to him. He took that as a yes. Franklin didn't ask more questions. He just helped her onto his horse, careful not to startle her, and rode slow along the trail home. Her bare legs were scratched raw. She held onto the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She never said a word. The ranch house sat quiet under the cottonwoods, just past the creek where his late wife, Mary, used to hang laundry. The porch hadn't seen a woman since Mary's illness took her 3 winters ago. His boots thudded on the boards as he carried the girl inside. She flinched when the door creaked. "It's all right," Franklin said gently. "You can rest here. I'll get you food." She ate in small bites. Water too. Didn't look him in the eye. He watched her from the table, arms folded. "You got a name?" No answer. He sighed. "All right then. You do not have to speak. But you are safe." She slept curled on Mary's old cot, wrapped in a quilt that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender. Franklin sat up late by the fire, watching shadows move across the floor, wondering where she came from and what had stolen her voice. Next morning, she was still there, watching the mountains through the window. He brought her clothes, Mary's old dress, boots that might fit. She changed behind the curtain without a sound. For 3 days, she followed him silently around the ranch. Watched him feed the horses, chop wood, mend fence. She moved like a ghost, always watching, never speaking. On the 4th day, she brought him a cup of coffee without being asked. He looked up from the porch rail, surprised. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. "Still not talking?" She looked away. He smiled faintly. "Well, when you feel like it, you can tell me what to call you." That evening, he tried playing the harmonica, Mary's favorite waltz. He had not touched it in over a year, but something about the girl's silence made him reach for old comforts. She sat on the steps, her face turned toward the music. For the first time, she smiled just a little. The next morning, Franklin saddled 2 horses. "You ride?" She hesitated, then nodded. They rode through the golden fields where the wind caught the tall grass like waves. Franklin didn't speak much. He had learned she responded better to quiet. At the ridge they paused. Below, the valley spread out green and wide. He offered her a piece of dried apple. As she took it, he said, "You remind me of someone." Her head tilted. "My wife, Mary." She was quiet too, but kind, smart. "Died 3 years back. Fever." The girl's eyes softened. She reached out, touched his hand. Just for a second. That night, he found her sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at the old pump organ that had not made a sound since Mary died. "You play?" he asked. She looked at him. Then slowly she nodded. He stepped back. "Go ahead." She sat stiffly on the bench, placed her hands with care, pressed one key, then another. A soft, broken chord filled the room. Then she sang. Just a few notes, low and clear, trembling like wind through pine. But Franklin froze. It was Mary's song. The one she used to hum while brushing her hair. The one she sang while washing the dishes. The one she sang the day she died. His chest went tight. He gripped the doorframe. "Where did you hear that?" he said hoarsely. The girl turned to him. Her eyes were full now, brimming. I do not know," she whispered. Her voice was rough from disuse. "It just came." He stared at her. "You have not spoken for days, and the first thing you say is my wife's song." Tears tracked down her cheeks. "I am sorry. I did not mean to, no," he said, stepping forward. "Do not be. It is just. It has been a long time." She stood. "I do not know who I am. I do not remember how I got to those trees. But I remember that song." Franklin reached out, gently took her hand. "It is all right. We will figure it out." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "I do not even know my name," she said. "Well," Franklin said, smiling a little, "then we will pick one until we find it." She smiled back. "All right." He thought for a moment. "How about Beatrice?" She nodded. "Beatrice." And from that moment, the girl who had not spoken became Beatrice. And she stayed. She swept the floors, helped in the garden, rode beside him into town. People stared, whispered, but Franklin ignored them. Beatrice was gentle, quick with her hands, and quiet in a way that made things feel peaceful. A month passed. One day, while fixing the barn roof, Franklin glanced down and saw her laughing, really laughing, as one of the colts nuzzled her braid. He stopped hammering. She looked up, still smiling. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Just glad you are here." And he meant it. Every word. The snow came early that year, curling over the hills in wet, heavy drifts that coated the pastures by mid-October. Franklin stabled the horses before dusk, his coat stiff with frost, while Beatrice boiled potatoes in the kitchen. The stove hissed, the windows fogged, and for the first time in years, the house breathed with heat and movement. She had taken to humming while she worked, not Mary's song, but others, strange and wordless. Sometimes it was barely more than a whisper under her breath, but it filled the rooms like light through glass. He never interrupted it. One morning, she asked to borrow his journal. He handed it over without question. She spent hours by the window, pencil in hand. When he passed, he saw she was sketching the view. The weathered barn, the crooked fence, the hills beyond. Her lines were sure, but there was sadness in the way she shaded the sky. "You draw often?" he asked. She shook her head. "Only since here." He nodded and left her to it. That evening, she laid the drawing on the table beside his supper plate. He studied it while steam rose from the cornbread. Her eye for detail startled him, the sag in the porch beam, the scuff marks on the barn door. But what caught him most was the tiny figure she had drawn near the gate. A man, hat low, leading a woman by the hand. He looked up at her. "This us?" "I think so," she said. His throat tightened, but he only nodded. "It's good." She touched the edge of the paper. "I think I was taught once. I remember chalk on a slate. A woman's voice behind me, correcting my grip." Franklin leaned forward. "School teacher." "Maybe," she said. "Maybe I was a student. I was younger." But the voice was kind. That night, as wind scratched the eaves, she brought out a quilt she had found in the cedar chest. She began patching a tear with needle and thread, hands moving slow but sure. Franklin watched the fire throw light on her face. "You've done that before," he said. She didn't look up. "My fingers remember things my mind doesn't." He nodded. "Your hands know who you were." That quiet hung between them, neither sad nor heavy, just true. The next day, he hitched the wagon and asked if she wanted to ride into town with him. Beatrice hesitated. then nodded. She wore a shawl he hadn't seen before. It must have been folded deep in the trunk, and a pair of gloves she had mended to fit. She sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes following the road with quiet alertness. They passed the whitewashed church, the blacksmith's shed, the general store with its cracked windows. Folks turned to look. Children paused in their play. Franklin kept his gaze forward, but Beatrice sat tall, chin lifted. Inside the mercantile, she broke away to the shelves of fabric while Franklin spoke with Mr. Kellum about cornmeal and nails. When he returned, she was holding a bolt of pale blue calico, one hand tracing the edge. "You like it?" She nodded. "It reminds me of something. I don't know what." "Then let's get it." She looked at him, startled. "I can make do." "I know," he said, "but you don't have to." On the ride back, she held the wrapped fabric in her lap. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." She turned her face to the wind. "I think I used to sew dresses. Not for myself. For someone else?" Her brow furrowed. "I see a child. Golden hair. She's laughing. There's a doll in her arms." Franklin kept his hands steady on the reins. "Could be a niece, or someone you cared for." "I think I loved her." He didn't press. She grew quiet again, eyes distant. That night, she laid the calico across the table, smoothing the folds. "Would you mind if I fixed up the bedroom?" He raised an eyebrow. "What for?" "I want it to feel like someone lives there again." He studied her face, the way she stood with her hands resting lightly on the fabric. "Go ahead." Beatrice worked for 3 days. Took down the yellowed curtains, washed the linens, scrubbed the wooden floor until it gleamed. She stitched a sash for the window and used leftover fabric to line the drawer bottoms. When she finished, she stood in the doorway and asked Franklin if he wanted to see. He stepped inside and stopped. The room had changed, but nothing felt erased. The space was still Mary's, but now touched with something new. A softness that belonged to someone else entirely. He turned to Beatrice. "You did this." She nodded. He looked around again. "You made it better." She held his gaze. "I'm not trying to take her place." "I know," he said, "but you are making your own." Later that week, a letter arrived from Miles City. It was addressed to Franklin in a precise, unfamiliar hand. He opened it slowly at the table while Beatrice ground coffee nearby. As he read, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" she asked. He set it down. "A marshal. Says a woman went missing from the stage line east of here. They've been searching. Description's vague, but he's asking around ranches." Beatrice went still. He met her eyes. "Could be you." She pressed a hand to her mouth. "I don't know." He folded the letter. "They're sending someone up next week. Just to talk." She nodded, eyes wide. Franklin stood. "No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." "I'm not afraid," she said. I don't want to leave here. Not yet." "You won't," he said gently. "We'll meet them together. See what they know." She reached for his hand. "Thank you." He held it warm and steady in his calloused grip. "You're not alone anymore, Beatrice." She didn't speak. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood there, the fire crackling low, the wind soft against the window pane, and the long Montana winter settling quiet around them. The marshal arrived just before first thaw, when crusted snow still rimmed the fence lines and the river ice cracked in the afternoons. Franklin spotted the rider from the barn loft, a compact man with a black oilskin coat and a tired horse. He came slow, respectful of the place, and tipped his hat as Franklin met him at the gate. "Marshal Lanton," he said. "Out of Rosebud." Franklin nodded. "Franklin Hale." The marshal dismounted, his boots crunching the half-thawed ground. "I appreciate you writing back. We've had precious little to go on." Woman vanished south of Miles City after the westbound stage overturned in a gulch. One survivor swore she saw a lady pulled clear before the coach caught fire. Dark hair, pale skin, a dress torn at the shoulder. Sound like anyone? Franklin kept his answer careful. Might. She's here. Calls herself Beatrice now. She doesn't remember anything before the mountains. The marshal's expression tightened. That happens. Head injuries, cold, shock. May I speak with her? Franklin glanced toward the porch. Beatrice waited under the eaves, wrapped in a wool cloak. She'd brushed her hair that morning, tied it back with a strip of blue calico. There was a steadiness in her that hadn't been there before. She's her own woman. If she wants to talk, she will. The marshal gave a nod, then approached slowly. Ma'am, he said, removing his hat. Don't mean to trouble you. I'm just trying to help someone find her kin. Beatrice studied him a moment, then stepped down from the porch. I remember a silver brooch, she said. Oval with a bird in flight. I wore it. The clasp was loose. The marshal blinked. That matches what we found in the wreckage. Burned cloth still pinned to it. We thought it belonged to the woman who died. Beatrice's voice was steady. It was mine. Franklin felt something shift between them then, like a knot loosening. The marshal looked between them. Your name might be Clara Bessem, daughter of a physician. She was heading west to teach at a girls' school in Bannack. Beatrice closed her eyes a moment. Clara, she said softly. Yes. That sounds right. Franklin watched her breathe through it. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't folding inward. She was holding her ground. I don't want to go back, she said. The marshal rubbed the brim of his hat. Your father posted a reward. Been searching 5 months. He believed you lived. Clara's voice didn't waver. He was a hard man. He believed in appearances. You're sure? I won't be locked behind shutters again. The marshal hesitated, then turned to Franklin. You'd vouch for her? With my life, Franklin said. Marshal Lanton studied the two of them for a long while, then sighed. Well, nothing in the law says a grown woman can't make her own way. I'll wire her father. Tell him she's alive and safe, but no longer his to claim. Clara nodded once. Thank you. The marshal stayed long enough for coffee, then rode out without looking back. That night, Franklin sat beside Clara on the porch, the cold lifting just enough to let the stars show through. She threaded her fingers through his. I remembered the brooch when I saw the kettle lid catch the firelight, she said. It came back in a rush. Made me feel like my ribs would split. You did fine, he said. She turned her face toward him. You didn't ask me to stay. You already did. Her fingers tightened. I'm not the same woman who stepped off that stagecoach. I know, he said, and I'm not the man who buried Mary. But I think we're something better than who we were. She leaned her head to his shoulder, and they sat like that while the fire inside burned low and the fields slept under the last of the snow. Weeks passed. Clara began to write again, filling pages with sketches and short notes. She read aloud to Franklin some evenings, small passages from books he'd never heard of. He listened, not for the meaning, but for the way her voice moved through the words like water over stone. One morning, she brought him a folded paper, her cheeks pink from the wind. I've been thinking, she said. There's no schoolhouse for miles, and children ride long to reach town. That old shed across the creek, if we clear it, I could teach there. Franklin considered it. You'd stay? Clara smiled. This is where I found myself again. I want to give something back to the land that held me. So they cleared the shed, repaired the roof, swept years of dust from the corners, and painted the door with leftover whitewash. Clara stitched curtains for the windows, and Franklin built a bench wide enough for 6. By midsummer, 3 children came daily, 2 more by autumn. Franklin watched her from the field sometimes, her voice rising in gentle instruction. The children gathered close. She wore her skirts with a kind of ease now, hair pinned back in a simple twist, sleeves rolled to the elbow as she chalked out sums. That winter, they stood together under the cottonwoods while snow fell soft and slow. "Marry me," Franklin said. Clara didn't speak right away. Then she touched his jaw, her thumb brushing the line of his cheek. "I want a life with you," she said. He wrapped his arms around her, pulled her into the warmth of his coat. "Then that's what we'll have." They wed in the chapel near the creek, with only the children and Mr. Kellum as witness. Clara wore a dress she'd sewn herself, and Franklin stood straighter than he had in years. At night, they lay in the quiet of the house they'd made together, the hearth low, her hand resting over his heart. And when she sang again Never Mary's song, not anymore, but her own, he held her close and listened until sleep took them both. By early spring, the earth had softened enough for Clara to coax rows of peas and turnips from the garden beds beside the house. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat Franklin found in the loft, long out of use, its ribbon frayed but still serviceable. Her hands, nimble with needle and slate, worked just as precisely with seed and spade. Franklin built her a bench from leftover pine planks and set it near the gate. She used it in the evenings, reading aloud from school primers while the last of the light clung to the hills. One dusky afternoon, she closed the book mid-sentence and stared out across the pasture. "I've been thinking about the child I saw when I only had pieces of memory," she said. "Golden-haired, laughing." Franklin leaned against the fence post, arms crossed. "You think she was more than a glimpse?" "I do now," Clara said, voice low. "Yesterday, I found a rhyme in the primer, Little Jenny with her curls, dancing skirts and silver pearls, and I remembered a voice singing that. My voice. I was holding the child's hands, spinning her around a room with blue walls." Franklin didn't answer right away. He let the breeze move between them. "She yours?" he asked, quiet. "I don't know, but I think I loved her like she was." He stepped closer, resting his hand over hers on the bench rail. "You want to try and find her?" Clara shook her head. "If she belonged to the life I left behind, then she's with people who knew me before. That world's far from here." "I'll stand with you either way," Franklin said. She turned her hand beneath his and gripped his fingers. "That's why I can bear the not knowing." That summer, the schoolhouse filled past its bench. Clara wrote to a carpenter in Hamilton and paid him with her sewing to build more seating. She taught 6 days a week, and on the 7th, sang softly while she washed the children's slates and laid the chalk to dry in a tin tray beside the stove. One evening, Franklin returned from his ride with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. He set it on the table without a word. Clara unfolded it carefully. Inside lay a set of oil paints, a small brush, and a square of stretched canvas. "I asked around in town," Franklin said. "Some widow up north used to paint before her hands stiffened. Said she'd rather see it used than boxed." Clara ran her fingers over the canvas. "You remembered I drew." "I remember everything about you," he said. She lifted the brush, cradling it like something fragile. "I haven't done this since before the stage overturned. Then now's the time to start again." She painted in the early mornings, before the children arrived. Her first work was the schoolhouse in winter light, the roof thick with snow, smoke curling from the stovepipe. Franklin hung it in the entryway without asking. One night, as rain streaked the windows and thunder rolled distant over the hills, Clara sat beside Franklin on the floor, her back against the hearthstones, a quilt over their knees. Her voice was hushed. "I never told you what I was running from." Franklin kept his eyes on the fire. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. The man my father promised me to he was cruel, not in ways that leave bruises. Just enough to make me smaller every day. Franklin turned to her then. I begged my father to release me from the match. He refused, said I'd shame him. So I fled. That's why you took the stage west, he said. She nodded. I thought I'd vanish quietly, become someone else. I didn't think I'd forget who I was. You didn't forget, Franklin said. You just gave yourself time to become who you needed to be. She leaned into him, her voice steadier now. You never asked me to explain. You never treated me like a puzzle to be solved. I saw a woman who needed a place to rest, he said. And then I saw the woman who made that place into a home. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder. I love you, Franklin Hale. He closed his eyes, hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. Then we're even, he said. That fall, the harvest was lean from late hail, but Clara made preserves from the last of the plum trees and dried apples for the children's lunches. Franklin repaired the barn roof ahead of the first snow, and Clara stitched a new lining into his coat, her initials tucked into the hem. They never spoke again of the woman she used to be. Not because it didn't matter, but because the life they had built together had grown too rich to leave room for anything else. One evening, as twilight spilled gold across the fields, Clara stood at the edge of the porch, fingers wrapped around the new railing Franklin had carved for her. I want to name the school, she said. Franklin came beside her. Have something in mind? She nodded. The Mary Hale School, for the woman who made room for me here, even in her absence. He didn't speak, just pulled her gently to his side, his arm across her back. And as the sun dropped behind the ridge, they stood together in the hush that comes when the land exhales at the end of a long day. Two souls who had weathered sorrow, found each other in the storm, and chosen, again and again, to stay. The air in March carried the faintest scent of thawing earth. Not spring yet, not truly, but the kind of day that let you believe it was coming soon. Franklin stood beside the creek with his boots sunk deep in the damp soil, measuring the distance between the broken post and the fence line. Clara had walked out with him, her shawl drawn close and her hair braided down her back. I think the water's rising faster this year, she said, watching it curl around the rocks. Could be the runoff from higher up. Franklin nodded and tapped the post with the toe of his boot. Might need to sink it deeper. I'll need to cut another length. She crouched, pressing her hand to the ground. This is soft enough. I'll help dig if you set the line. I'll not have you wrenching your shoulder out here. She gave a quiet laugh. You've seen me handle a dozen schoolchildren through arithmetic. Digging's nothing. He grinned but didn't argue. They worked a while in silence, shovels and spades scraping earth, the light shifting golden through the bare cottonwoods. Clara paused now and then to stretch her back and look toward the ridge. You ever think about what you'd be doing if I hadn't come out of those trees? She asked. Franklin leaned on his shovel. Maybe I'd have patched that roof sooner. Maybe I'd have let the barn lean until the spring wind pushed it flat. But I doubt I'd have been smiling as much as I do now. She stood and brushed the dirt from her skirt. I was thinking, if this land is ours together, I'd like to plant something permanent. Not just food, but something that stays. Franklin wiped his brow. Like what? A lilac bush, near the porch. I remember one from years back. I don't know where, but the scent was strong as honey. I want that here. He nodded. Then come planting season. We'll ride into Hamilton and bring one back. That evening, Clara sat by the window with a length of muslin stretched in a small embroidery hoop. Her needle moved slowly, shaping the outline of a bird against a hill. Franklin carved at a length of cedar for the new fence gate, the shavings curling at his feet. Do you ever miss the town? She asked without looking up. Not once, he said. You? She thought for a moment. Sometimes I miss the sound of a piano. Nothing grand. Just the way it filled a room. He set his knife down. I might be able to find one. There's a boarding house closing in Deer Lodge. A fellow mentioned it last week. She looked up, startled. You'd do that? If it brings you peace, yes. You've brought plenty to me. That spring, when the snow finally gave way to green, they rode to Deer Lodge and returned with a small upright piano tied carefully across the wagon. It took 3 neighbors and half the day to move it into the parlor. When the last man left, Franklin shut the door and leaned against the frame. Clara stood beside the instrument, her hand tracing the smooth edge of the key cover. She lifted it, pressed one note, then another. The sound was a little thin, slightly out of tune, but she smiled. I don't know if I remember how to play properly, she said. Then we'll learn together, Franklin said, pulling a stool beside her. She played in the evenings, soft and slow, her fingers finding melodies she hadn't known she carried. The children began to linger after lessons just to hear her. Sometimes Franklin would come in from the fields and find a boy resting against the doorframe, eyes closed, listening. By midsummer, Clara had begun teaching a few of them to play. She wrote new lessons by hand, lined with simple notes and careful instruction. Franklin built shelves beside the piano to hold her pages. In August, a girl named Lori whose family had ridden west from Minnesota asked Clara why she didn't have any children of her own. Clara paused, then said, "Sometimes love grows first, and the rest comes when it's meant to." That night, as they sat watching the stars rise over the ridge, Franklin turned to her. "What if we tried?" Clara laid her head against his arm. "I'd like that." They planted the lilac bush together in the fall, just before the first frost. Clara chose a place near the porch where the sun touched in the afternoon. Franklin dug the hole while she cradled the roots, careful not to break the tender shoots. "This'll be here when we're old," she said. He pressed the soil down gently. "That's the idea." Winter came again, milder than the last. The schoolhouse stayed full, and Clara's lessons continued even through the deepest snow. The piano held its tune. Franklin built a narrow hearth for the children to gather near, and Clara stitched small wool cushions for them to sit on. In March, Clara pressed Franklin's hand to her middle beneath the quilt one morning and whispered, "I think I know now." He sat up slowly, his eyes searching hers. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Not far along, but it feels different." He touched her cheek, then rested his forehead to hers. "We'll make a good life for them." The seasons turned. The lilac bloomed in soft purple clouds come May, and the sound of children's laughter circled the house like birdsong. Franklin built a cradle by hand, smooth and sturdy, and Clara lined it with muslin she'd embroidered with bluebirds in flight. She gave birth in late autumn, the child born just before first light. A girl, with her mother's dark eyes and Franklin's quiet stillness. They named her Marian, for the strength of the women who had shaped their lives. Clara held her close and sang, not the songs of memory, but new ones she'd written in the hush of early mornings. Franklin rocked the cradle with a hand calloused by seasons and softened by love. And when the snow fell again, they stood arm in arm at the window, their daughter asleep between them, the lilac bush dusted white, the house warm with wood smoke and music and the kind of peace that only comes when two people have walked through the dark and chosen, again and again, to stay.